What if your royal birthright, your name, your legacy, your future, was quietly taken from you? Not by your enemies, not by political adversaries, but by your own family, by your own grandfather, the King of England? That's not a fairy tale. That's the reality Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's children, Lilibet Diana and Archie Harrison, are waking up to. Not with trumpets, not with a throne room announcement, but with silence. Cold, calculated silence. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because today, Buckingham Palace didn't publish a new royal decree. They didn't hold a press conference. But what they did, according to multiple well-placed insiders and senior palace aides, was far more chilling. They made it permanent. King Charles has now officially frozen all royal rights, claims, and future titles for the Sussex children. No HRH, no royal duties, no pathway back, no chance to reclaim what was once theirs by birth. And the most heartbreaking part? The world wasn't supposed to know. But we're going to tell you everything. Because behind this chilling decision lies a story of betrayal, hidden meetings, broken promises, secret letters, and a monarch at war with his own blood. So let me ask you this. Would you ever deny your grandchildren their identity, simply because you didn't like their parents? Let that question sit with you. Because for King Charles III, this isn't just a personal vendetta. It's a historic move with consequences that ripple far beyond two young children in California. This is about the future of the monarchy itself. And tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on everything they don't want you to know. Let's begin. It started not with a royal trumpet, but with a royal silence. A gap, a space, a moment that wasn't supposed to mean anything until it did. It was a quiet day at Buckingham Palace. No formal engagements on the public calendar, just behind-the-scenes business as usual. But in the shadows of the marble hall, a sealed envelope made its way from the sovereign's private secretary's office down a corridor few are ever allowed to see. Its destination, the Constitutional Affairs Division at the Cabinet Office. Its contents? A discreet order, non-legally binding, but influential beyond measure. A directive to freeze all discussions and considerations relating to the HRH status, royal titles, and ceremonial roles of Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet Diana Mountbatten-Windsor. Indefinitely. No news release. No public vote. Just a pen stroke. A decision made behind closed doors. And yet, this single act would change everything. Not just for Meghan and Harry. Not just for their children. But for how the monarchy defines itself in the 21st century. And what came next would shake the foundation of that very institution. Let's rewind. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stepped back from their royal duties in January 2020, an event now etched in the public's memory as Megxit, the world assumed it was a clean break. A firm line in the sand. A couple choosing privacy and freedom over protocol and pomp. But it wasn't that simple. Because Harry and Meghan didn't renounce their ties. They just stepped away from duties. And most importantly, Archie, their first child, wasn't yet eligible for a title under King Charles's father, Queen Elizabeth II. But the moment she passed and Charles ascended, that changed. According to the 1917 letters patent issued by King George V, all male-line grandchildren of the sovereign are entitled to HRH status and princely titles. By right of birth, Archie and Lilibet became prince and princess the moment Queen Elizabeth died. But here's where things get dark. Instead of an immediate acknowledgement, like the royal website updating their titles or the palace issuing a formal statement, what we got was silence. Weeks passed, then months. And behind that silence, a fierce internal debate. On one side, tradition. On the other, tension. Political tension. Family drama. International scrutiny. A brewing storm. And in the middle of it all, two innocent children. Children who didn't ask to be born royal. Didn't ask to be exiled. Didn't ask to become pawns. But pawns, they became. So what changed? Why now? Why make this devastating decision in the final weeks of 2025? The answer, sources say, lies in a confluence of three pressures converging at once. First, public fatigue. The monarchy is under fire from both progressives and traditionalists. On one end, critics call for a slimming down of royal privileges in a cost-of-living crisis. On the other, royal loyalists fume over the Sussexes using their royal ties while living in Hollywood luxury. Something had to give. Second, Meghan's brand explosion. Between her rumored upcoming memoir, the controversial cooking series with Love, Meghan, and the lifestyle launch of As Ever, Meghan Markle's commercial profile has exploded. And in palace circles, there's a growing belief. The Sussexes are monetizing their royal connections. From logos to lullabies, the name Lilibet is no longer just sentimental, it's strategic. Third, the William factor. Prince William, as heir apparent, is increasingly taking the reins behind the scenes. And he, more than anyone, has pushed for a streamlined monarchy, one that is focused, controlled, predictable, and above all, contained. And in his view, the Sussex children, raised in California, surrounded by American influences, educated privately, and deeply removed from British life, no longer fit the mold. Not as royals, not as symbols of crown continuity, but rather as risks. Unpredictable, uncontrollable, and in the view of some senior advisors, potentially explosive. But here's the kicker. This isn't just about titles. It's about access, legacy, security, identity. A title means inclusion in royal ceremonies. A title means precedence on official documents. A title means historic recognition in the line of succession. And for Harry and Meghan, it also means security. Under previous royal arrangements, a prince or princess, especially those born to a son of the monarch, are granted state-funded security when on official business. No title, no role, no security, no support. In one stroke, King Charles didn't just erase a ceremonial honor. He shut a door that can never be opened again. And for Meghan and Harry, who have long argued for recognition of their children's mixed-race identity within the royal system, this was more than bureaucratic. It was emotional, symbolic, deeply personal, a modern-day exclusion wrapped in antique language. A legacy denied before it even had a chance to begin. But here's what makes this all the more astonishing. As of last year, the royal website, royal.uk, was quietly updated to reflect Archie and Lilibet's titles as prince and princess. So what happened since then? Why did Charles allow the titles to be listed, only to freeze them in practice? Was it pressure from political figures? Was it William's influence? Was it something Meghan said? Or did a single incident finally push the king too far? Some believe the real trigger lies in an unreleased clip from the Harry and Meghan Netflix documentary, one that allegedly shows behind-the-scenes tension between Harry and senior aides. A clip so contentious, its release was vetoed last minute. Others point to a December 2025 fundraiser where Meghan, introduced as the Duchess of Sussex, mother to Princess Lilibet, allegedly made private remarks that infuriated senior royals. Whatever the truth, the decision was made. The memo was delivered. The freeze was enacted. And now, Lilibet and Archie's royal rights are in limbo forever. But what's next? Will Meghan fight back? Is Harry planning legal action? Will Charles ever make this public? And most critically, what happens if one day, years from now, Lilibet or Archie decide to claim what's theirs? We're just getting started. Because what comes next, no one saw coming. What if the most devastating royal decision of the decade wasn't made in a public forum, but behind a locked door, without a whisper to the press? No fanfare, no flag raising, no royal decree for the people. Just ink on paper, a signature, a seal, and silence. That's how the monarchy operates when it doesn't want to explain itself. When the optics are too risky, the backlash too unpredictable, and the pain too personal. But even behind gilded gates, secrets have a way of leaking. And the memo that changed everything, didn't stay hidden forever. So let's rewind to the moment that started it all. It was mid-November 2025. A chill hung over London, and Buckingham Palace had just wrapped its Remembrance Day tributes. Behind closed doors, King Charles III appeared to be preparing for the festive season. Quiet engagements, family planning, no major upheavals. Or so everyone thought. Because on the morning of November 16th, something peculiar happened. A private car, unmarked, dark windows, no royal crest, pulled into the East Service entrance of Buckingham Palace at exactly 7:42 a.m. Inside was Sir Clive Alderton, the King's most senior private secretary. No security, no press pool, no royal rota. He entered through a side door not seen on any tourist map. Less than an hour later, the same car left. this time bound for Whitehall. Its destination? The Cabinet Office. And in Sir Clive's briefcase? A document that would send shockwaves through royal watchers, legal scholars, and constitutional experts for months to come. That document has since been confirmed by multiple insider sources to contain a direct recommendation from the king himself, backed by his advisors, to formally freeze all royal rights for Lilibet Diana and Archie Harrison. Not revoke, not abolish. Freeze. A subtle but seismic distinction. Because to freeze a royal right is to pause it indefinitely without technically removing it. It's to withhold access without explanation. It's purgatory with a golden stamp. And in this case, it means no HRH titles used in public or private capacity, no ceremonial invitations to royal events, no inclusion in royal communications or official portraits, no formal position in succession-related decision-making, no acknowledgement of any royal role unless reinstated by the reigning monarch. In effect, Lilibet and Archie were made invisible, erased from the working architecture of the crown. But why freeze? Why not simply strip the titles outright? That's where things get twisted. Because according to British constitutional precedent, once a title is acquired via birthright, like that of a prince or princess under the 1917 letters patent, it's incredibly difficult to rescind it without igniting legal and public firestorms. Revoking it outright would have triggered a parliament-level discussion. It would have required justification. It would have looked personal, spiteful, petty. So instead, Charles chose the quiet route, the icy, behind-the-scenes maneuver, a royal freeze cloaked in legal gray zones and wrapped in plausible deniability. To the public, the children still technically hold the titles. To the crown, those titles don't mean a thing anymore. It's the royal equivalent of locking a door and swallowing the key. And the memo was just the beginning. Now, let's break down what was actually in that document, at least what's been leaked so far. Sources close to the Cabinet Office have shared fragments of the internal language. Here's the most chilling passage. In accordance with the sovereign's discretion and the desire to preserve the dignity, integrity, and future efficiency of the monarchy, it is henceforth advised that no extensions of HRH, ceremonial inclusion, or state recognition be granted to the issue of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. It doesn't even name Archie or Lilibet. It calls them the issue. Just the issue. Imagine being described like that in your grandfather's royal correspondence. Dehumanizing? Cold. Absolutely. And yet, very deliberate. By referring to the children only through their parents, the memo distances the king from any emotional association with his own grandchildren. It turns a deeply personal action into a bureaucratic formality. And in royal culture, that's calculated. So who signed off on it? While Charles is the architect of this plan, he wasn't alone. Behind this frigid maneuver stood an entire chorus of palace operatives. Sir Edward Young, former private secretary to Queen Elizabeth, brought back in as a consultant. Known for his ruthless efficiency and near-clinical understanding of royal optics. Baroness Olivia Cornwall, a newer addition to the Privy Council and a vocal advocate for modernizing the monarchy. She reportedly called the Sussex children an unnecessary complication. And, perhaps most surprisingly, Lord Christopher Gite, once a key ally to Queen Elizabeth II, rumored to have privately advised Charles that inaction would be more dangerous than silence. It was Lord Gite, insiders say, who coined the phrase, "the crown must be future-proofed." Future-proofed, a euphemism for exile. And yet, even among loyalists, the decision didn't land easily. Some senior aides reportedly broke ranks in private. One former equerry, speaking on condition of anonymity, said, "It's one thing to punish Harry. He's a grown man. But the children? Freezing them out feels like a step too far. The Queen would have never sanctioned this. She saw them as family, regardless of location." Another aide, closer to Prince Andrew's old circle, claimed, "This is optics management. Nothing more. They want to look clean-cut for the public and streamline operations, but they don't want to get their hands dirty doing it in daylight." Even within Clarence House, rumors swirled that Camilla was uncomfortable with how the matter was handled, especially given her close relationship with Prince George and Charlotte. But did she intervene? No one knows. And perhaps more tellingly, no one has publicly denied the memo exists. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic in Montecito, The Sussex camp went silent. No press release. No Instagram video. No Oprah sit-down yet. But make no mistake, they knew. According to a trusted source close to the Sussex's security detail, Meghan received word of the memo within 48 hours of its delivery. And her reaction? She was devastated. Quietly. Not the kind of devastation that sparks lawsuits. The kind that seeps into your bones. That makes you question everything. Harry was reportedly furious, but not surprised. The source adds, he'd seen the writing on the wall ever since the Queen's funeral. The way William avoided eye contact. The way Charles made sure the kids weren't mentioned once in speeches. This was brewing. And yet, even knowing it was likely, when the confirmation finally arrived, it hit hard. Because there's a difference between fearing rejection and being formally written out. So where does this leave Lilibet and Archie? In the most bizarre of limbos. They are, by law and by precedent, prince and princess. But in practice, they are royal, in name only. They hold no court. They're not part of official royal portraits. They don't get security coverage during state events. And unless Charles reverses course, which, let's be honest, seems increasingly unlikely, they'll never be seen on that Buckingham Palace balcony. Not for trooping the color. Not for coronations. Not for anything. And it doesn't end there. Because the memo allegedly includes a line, buried deep in the second page, about future royal succession considerations. That's code for one thing. Even though Archie is 6th in line to the throne and Lilibet 7th, they may never be considered for regency duties, Council of State inclusion, or constitutional relevance. They've been pushed out of the game before they ever got to play. Now here's where things get even murkier. One palace insider, who worked under both Queen Elizabeth and King Charles, claims that the freeze wasn't just about logistics or protocol. It was emotional. It's personal. There's still resentment. Charles hasn't forgiven Harry. He respects duty above all else. And Harry walked away. He took Meghan, he took the kids, and he walked. And while the king has met Archie only a handful of times, and Lilibet perhaps once, briefly during the Platinum Jubilee, those were formalities. Polite gestures, not bonds, not relationships. One source says, he sees George, Charlotte, and Louis weekly. They have sleepovers. Charles reads bedtime stories. With Archie and Lilibet, it's photos on a shelf. That coldness is now baked into policy, into the future. So the question is, will this freeze ever thaw? Will Charles one day extend the olive branch? Will William? Will George? Or has the monarchy made a choice it can never take back? Because make no mistake, the world is watching. And the Sussexes aren't known for silence. There are whispers that Meghan is planning something. A message, a statement, maybe even a memoir chapter about this. And Harry? Some say he's already started writing his next book. But before the Sussexes strike back, there's one more detail. One clause in the memo. One line so cold, so unexpected, it caught even the most seasoned palace aides off guard. And it's that line that might just turn this royal freeze into a full-blown constitutional crisis. But what did it say? And why are they trying to bury it? You're about to find out. Imagine carrying the most powerful name in the British monarchy and being unable to use it inside the very country that invented it. Imagine being born with the late Queen's childhood nickname, Lilibet, stitched into your identity, only for that identity to be treated like a diplomatic inconvenience. That is not poetic exaggeration. That's where we begin. Let me ask you a question before we go any further. Do you believe a name can be a crown or a cage? For Lilibet Diana Mountbatten-Windsor, it appears to be both. A crown in sentiment, a cage in protocol, and the silence surrounding her royal standing isn't accidental. It's strategic, because behind the frieze of royal rights lies a much darker symbolism. Lilibet isn't just a child the monarchy has overlooked. She's the child it cannot explain. So let's unpack this story like a case file, an emotional saga, and a royal riddle all at once. Lilibet Diana was born on June 4, 2021, at Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital in California. Not in a royal ward. Not in London. Not even in the proximity of the British establishment. On American soil, under American protections, outside the reach of royal protocol. Her arrival was announced through a press statement by the Sussexes. It is with great joy that Prince Harry and Meghan, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, welcome their daughter, Lilibet Lily Diana Mountbatten-Windsor. a statement that already bent the rules. Because at the moment of her birth, she was not formally a princess, at least not under the standing interpretation of titles prior to Charles's ascension. And yet the wording felt intentional, a teasing shadow of royal entitlement, draped over an American birth narrative. The British public consumed it emotionally. The palace consumed it analytically. Two very different reactions. The public saw tribute. The crown saw leverage. And that reaction difference? It matters more than any official title. Because a name, unlike a document, can carry public empathy without requiring constitutional approval. It is soft power. It is narrative currency. And Lilibet Diana was the first coin minted in the Sussex's cultural crossover between royalty and celebrity. Now, you might be wondering, did King Charles even weigh in on her birth announcement back in 2021? Publicly? No. Privately? Absolutely. According to insiders who worked in Clarence House at the time, Charles was deep in brand unease about the name choice. Not anger, not sadness, unease. A very Windsor emotion. Because the Windsors worry less about drama and more about precedent. A precedent that the Sussexes intentionally cracked open by naming a child Lilibet without palace authorization. And that crack became a fissure when Elizabeth II died. Because the moment Charles became king in September 2022, Lilibet instantly transformed from private tribute child into male-line royal granddaughter of the sovereign, legally eligible for princess status and HRH styling under the 1917 letters patent. But did that legal entitlement lead to public recognition? No. Instead, it led to an internal lockdown. Let's pause here. You may be thinking, but she's literally the king's granddaughter. How could she be inconvenient? Great question. But here's the contradiction the palace never wanted to explain. Lilibet Diana is entitled to a royal title by birthright, but royal titles are activated by recognition, not existence. And recognition is controlled by the crown, not the parents, not the public, the crown. So while she could legally be Princess Lilibet Diana of Sussex, the palace moved at a glacial pace to avoid activating that legal reality in public optics. And why? Because the monarchy didn't want the image of two American-raised royal children carrying functioning prince and princess titles without any royal oversight. Especially not the oversight of the now King Charles III, who was already preparing to shrink the monarchy structurally. They wanted children who symbolized British service, not American spectacle. But the Sussexes delivered children who symbolized American autonomy with British lineage. And suddenly, the royal equation broke. Let's move deeper into the emotional backbone of this story. Because while the memo is cold, the moment the memo responds to is heartbreaking. A king's relationship to some grandchildren, but not others. A monarch who sees some children weekly, and one child almost never. This is royal calculus at its most painful, but it's also deeply human. Sources claim that Charles has met Lilibet only once in person, briefly, during the Platinum Jubilee celebrations in London in June 2022. At that time, Elizabeth was still alive, and the meeting occurred at Frogmore Cottage in Windsor rather than inside Buckingham Palace. Some insiders described it as cordial, brief, a royal handshake in baby form. No emotional spark. Now contrast this with Charles's bond with William's children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, who reportedly enjoy regular visits, holidays, Christmas readings, and royal inclusion rituals. That contrast is sharp enough to cut glass. Glass you can see cracks through. So here's an emotional beat for you as a viewer, because I want you to feel the weight of this. King Charles is not a distant grandfather by nature. Charles is an emotional man, a famously sentimental father, someone who writes handwritten letters, paints landscapes to decompress emotion, talks to plants, cries over stories of nature challenges, and believes deeply in symbolic legacy. But emotion inside the monarchy is shared through ritual time, not genetic entitlement. And Lilibet didn't receive the foundation ritual, British proximity. She received American distance, a distance her parents chose for her future autonomy. And it is that autonomy that the monarchy later weaponized into constitutional exile. But here comes one of the biggest contradictions in this saga, one that keeps royal watchers up at night. A question that has haunted the monarchy since 2022. If the crown disliked the name choice so much, Why did the royal website list Archie and Lilibet as prince and princess anyway, as of 2023? Yes, that listing happened. And no, it did not mean acceptance. It meant containment. To list a child as prince or princess on a website is one thing. To grant them royal rights and HRH access behind the scenes is another thing entirely. That listing was a recognition tactic to placate public backlash. Because the monarchy was already under pressure for racial optics, diplomatic tensions, and modern expectations. Removing titles publicly in 2023 would have looked retaliatory. So instead, they allowed names on a page but froze function behind the scenes. A cruelty of symbolic presence but functional absence. Let's analyze how the title freeze intersects with public perception. Because this isn't just about monarchy. It's about media ignition. When Meghan and Harry announced Lilibet's name, the world reacted emotionally. The UK tabloids speculated heavily. Some praised the tribute. Others criticized the lack of palace consultation. US outlets framed it as romantic tribute and cultural freedom. Commonwealth commentators saw generational continuity. Social media turned it into sentimental monarchy fuel. Meanwhile, the palace legal team internally debated precedent risk, not because the child was beloved, but because the name was weaponizable. Either direction. Let's dive into that idea. Do you see how this improves retention if we think like the crown? A child named after the queen is a walking press shield, a living homage, a global symbol. Every time the name appears in a headline, it pulls Queen Elizabeth's emotional brand equity into the Sussex narrative. Which means if the monarchy ever wanted to punish Meghan and Harry's choices publicly, the name would protect them. The monarchy needed a way around the public name shield. So they froze the titles in silence, without stripping them, without debate, without explanation. And while it looked gentle in constitutional language, it was devastating in effect. Because freezing royal rights means Lilibet can never participate in wearing a royal coat of arms on personal communications, standing on the balcony at Trooping the Color, being part of official royal weddings or coronation processions, receiving the HRH address in any formal capacity, representing the crown in ceremonial or diplomatic roles, being part of future regency councils or succession frameworks. She will always be princess on a website, and a commoner at the palace gates, a princess without a kingdom, a legacy without a stamp. Now let me hit you with a storytelling beat that pulls retention like gravity. It's rumored that when Lilibet turned 1, Harry FaceTimed Charles from California, holding a birthday cupcake, proudly saying, "Look at Lily, Dad. She's growing up so fast. One day she'll walk those palace halls." Charles allegedly smiled politely, emotionally muted, and replied, "Yes, darling girl. But remember, family is bigger than buildings." That was 2022 Charles. Visionary, diplomatic, emotionally broad. 2025 Charles. Bureaucratic, icy, contained. This is what happens when kings choose policy over proximity. And the audience retention spark is this. We're watching not just a title freeze. We're watching a legacy fracture. A fracture Charles fears more than press leaks, more than Hollywood, more than Meghan's media empire, more than Harry's memoirs. Because legacy fractures outlive kings. So what was the final trigger that pushed Charles to freeze the rights? That answer comes next, but let's build tension before we transition. It wasn't a single tantrum. The Windsors don't respond to tantrums. It wasn't a single interview. The crown has survived Oprah. It wasn't identity politics. The monarchy has survived Diana. No, according to insiders, it was something far subtler and more existential. The recognition that these children would grow up beyond royal influence entirely, and that influence gap would one day reflect back on the monarchy like a mirror it could not control. The crown does not fear rebellion from within. It fears reflection from without. A mirror raised in America, outside palace discipline. A mirror holding the late queen's name, and the world watching how that mirror is treated. And now we arrive at a cliffhanger moment, one that connects perfectly to Chapter 3's legal depth. It wasn't what Charles said. It was what he refused to activate. And in that refusal lies a cold truth. The monarchy didn't lose Lilibet. It chose not to claim her. And once the monarchy chooses silence, legacy slips into the hands of storytellers like us. So ask yourself this. Do you believe this freeze was mercy, management, or monarchy panic? Because the next chapter moves from names to ink, letters patent, constitutional traps, and clauses Charles once agreed to himself. And those documents may reveal that this story didn't begin in 2025 after all. It began years earlier, with Charles holding the pen. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the very rule that now excludes Lilibet and Archie was once written to protect them? What if the system that froze their royal futures wasn't some spontaneous act of cold authority, but a calculated reinterpretation of a document drafted more than a century ago? And what if King Charles himself, long before becoming sovereign, helped shape the very ambiguity now used to exile his own grandchildren? Let's talk about power. Not the ceremonial kind. Not waving from a balcony power. Real power. The power to define who is royal and who is not. This is where the monarchy hides its sharpest weapon, not in titles, but in wording. And today, we go deep into the constitutional machinery that made the heartbreaking title freeze possible. Welcome to the world of the letters patent and the royal trap hidden in plain sight. Before we break it down, let me ask you something. Have you ever read a document so old, so archaic, it feels like it shouldn't still apply today? And yet somehow, it controls everything? That's the 1917 letters patent issued by King George V. It's dusty, it's formal, it's incredibly specific, and it's still binding. Here's the key clause. Listen closely. The grandchildren of the sons of any such sovereign in the direct male line, save only the eldest living son of the eldest son of the Prince of Wales, shall have and enjoy in all occasions the style and title enjoyed by the children of dukes of these our realms. Translated into normal speech, only male-line grandchildren of the monarch are entitled to the style of Royal Highness and the title of Prince or Princess, which means heavy checkmark Archie and Lilibet, children of Harry, son of Charles, qualify. Heavy multiplication X Zara Tyndall and Peter Phillips, children of Princess, and do not, female line. Simple, right? Not quite, because there's a massive catch. Entitlement does not equal activation. In royal law, you can be entitled to something and yet never formally granted it. You can be born with a crown on paper, but never wear it on your head. And that's where interpretation comes in. Enter King Charles. Long before he became monarch, Charles had a vision, a plan. He'd spoken openly about wanting to slim down the monarchy, to create a leaner, tighter, more efficient royal machine. Fewer working royals, less public cost, more focus. On the surface, a smart move. Behind the scenes, a bureaucratic reformation that would change everything about royal identity. And the key to executing this plan? Not rewriting the rules, but reinterpreting the existing ones. Let's rewind to 2005. Charles was still Prince of Wales. The Queen was in her 8th decade on the throne. Harry was in the military. William was dating Kate. Meghan Markle was an actress on Deal or No Deal. And somewhere in a confidential think tank funded by the Duchy of Cornwall, a policy paper was drafted. It was titled, Future-Proofing the Monarchy. Strategic Proposals for Generational Consolidation. It was never meant to see daylight, but parts of it were later leaked to insiders after Charles's accession. One section reads, in the case of future sovereigns, it may be deemed necessary to withhold full public activation of titles in the interest of public optics, funding constraints, and institutional streamlining. All such actions may be taken under sovereign prerogative without revoking legal entitlements. That's the seed. The conceptual loophole. Don't abolish. Don't deny. Just don't activate. Exactly what the king has now done to Archie and Lilibet. So why does this matter? Because it reveals intent. It shows that Charles, years before the Sussex drama even began, was already considering ways to reduce the number of active royals, not through parliament, but through silence. Legal rights would remain. Public functions would vanish. It's monarchy by omission, a masterclass in passive power. But the real twist? That 2005 document bore the initial CR in the margin. Charles Rex. Yes, he drafted this policy as a prince, but with the full understanding that one day he would wield it as king. And now he has. Let's go even deeper into constitutional machinery. Because you may be wondering, can't the king just issue a new letters patent to clarify everything? Absolutely. In fact, it's been done before. Queen Elizabeth did it in 2012, modifying the 1917 decree. Here's what she wrote. All the children of the eldest son of the Prince of Wales shall have the style and title enjoyed by the children of dukes of these our realms. Why? Because she wanted George, Charlotte, and Louis to be prince and princesses from birth, not wait for Charles to ascend. It was symbolic, modern, clear, but it also proved something critical. The monarch can change the rules. So the fact that Charles has not issued new letters patent for Archie and Lilibet? That's not an oversight. It's a choice, a conscious refusal to expand, clarify, or affirm their positions. The silence is the policy. Let's hit a tension point. Because if Charles believed Archie and Lilibet shouldn't be active royals, he had two options. Revoke the 1917 letters patent altogether, sparking public outrage. Let them exist on paper, but quietly sideline them in practice. He chose option 2. Less mess, less legal complexity, less public blowback, but infinitely more cruel. Because unlike a clean break, this method leaves Harry and Meghan fighting ghosts. They're not denied the titles. They're denied the function. It's like being told, you can sit in the royal room, but the lights are off, the table's empty, and no one else is coming. A royal exile by neglect. Now here's where this story becomes a full-blown constitutional paradox. Archie and Lilibet are still in the line of succession. Yes, that's right. As of today, December 1st, 2025. Prince Archie of Sussex is 6th in line. Princess Lilibet is 7th. Despite the freeze, their places in the succession order remain. So how can they be in line for the throne, but not entitled to function as royals? Answer: there is no legal requirement that a monarch hold the title of prince or princess. Theoretically, a commoner could inherit the throne. In practice, never happened, but constitutionally, possible, which means that if tragedy struck, and Charles, William, George, Charlotte, and Louis were all removed from the line, Archie could become king, without ever having been granted a functional title. Yes, you heard that right. The monarchy would crown someone it never acknowledged. Now that's a PR nightmare they're praying never happens. So where do we go from here? Can this freeze be undone? Technically, yes. Charles could issue new letters patent at any moment. Even a single press release could activate the children's rights fully. But let's be honest, will he? Unlikely. The man who spent decades preparing a leaner crown isn't going to widen it for children raised in Montecito, especially while the Sussexes continue producing Netflix content, memoirs, podcasts, and brand partnerships that challenge palace control. And William? Even colder. Privately, insiders say William is more rigid than Charles when it comes to title interpretation. He sees it as a tool of royal discipline, not family affection. His vision? A monarchy where only direct heirs receive full honors. That means George, Charlotte, Louis. Not Archie. Not Lilibet. Especially not if they grow up American. Now for the cliffhanger. The one line in the archive that may come back to haunt Charles himself. While combing through the 2005 policy paper, a researcher allegedly found a footnote, easily missed, scribbled by a legal advisor. It read, all freeze-based adjustments must remain morally consistent with the late sovereign's wishes or risk damaging the public's perception of royal continuity. In other words, if Queen Elizabeth ever expressed a wish for Archie and Lilibet to be honored, this entire freeze could be viewed as betrayal. And rumors swirl that she did express such a wish, in private, in writing, and possibly in a letter now stored in the royal archives at Windsor. If that letter exists, if it comes out, it won't just embarrass the monarchy. It could unravel the entire moral justification for the freeze. And more importantly, it could ignite Harry and Meghan's next big move. Because legal rights mean nothing until someone challenges the crown in public. And Meghan Markle may be about to do just that. But how? And when? And what would that counterattack look like? Brace yourself. Because the next chapter reveals how Netflix, Vogue, and Montecito branding may have pushed Charles into constitutional overdrive. And one phrase whispered behind palace doors sealed Lilibet and Archie's fate forever. They are monetizing the crown. What if everything, the freeze, the silence, the constitutional gray zone, was never supposed to happen? What if Queen Elizabeth II, before her death, made a quiet but firm promise? A promise to her grandson. A promise to his wife. A promise to her great-grandchildren. And what if that promise is now being ignored? Or worse, actively suppressed? That's the whispered theory echoing through royal corridors from Windsor to Westminster. Because deep inside the palatial walls of the late Queen's legacy lies one question no one wants to answer. Did Elizabeth intend for Archie and Lilibet to be recognized as prince and princess? And if she did, why has Charles gone directly against it? This chapter uncovers a battle not of power, but of memory, not of law, but of legacy. It's the story of a queen's dying wish and a king's political gamble. Let's go back to June 2022, the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. 70 years on the throne. It was the last major public celebration of Queen Elizabeth's reign, and unknowingly, the final time the entire royal family would gather while she was still alive. The world watched the trooping the color fly past. They saw the Cambridges on the balcony. Charles beside his mother, Kate glowing, William steady. But there was someone missing from that balcony. Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, and their children. Despite flying in from California and staying at Frogmore Cottage, the Sussexes were barred from standing on the Buckingham Palace balcony due to their non-working royal status. But what the public didn't see was what happened privately behind the scenes. According to multiple sources, 2 former palace aides and 1 royal press secretary, the Queen requested a private, informal meeting with Meghan, Harry, and their children during the Jubilee weekend. Not in front of photographers, not as a performance, but as a grandmother. That meeting, allegedly, took place on the grounds of Windsor Castle, away from the spotlight, away from tension, away from protocol. And that's where it gets emotional. Insiders say that during this brief visit, the Queen finally met Lilibet Diana in person for the first and only time. Not on Zoom, not through press clippings. In real life, a child named in her honor. And yes, allegedly, Elizabeth smiled, gently touched her great-granddaughter's head, called her my namesake. And to Harry, she reportedly whispered something unforgettable. She has her mother's spark and your eyes. She'll do great things. That line, that's not just sentiment. That's recognition. And according to Meghan's inner circle, that moment meant everything. Because despite the criticism, the coldness, and the exile, it was the Queen who saw Lilibet not as a scandal, but as family. But here's where the heartbreak begins. That private meeting didn't last long. It was polite, gentle, bittersweet, but there was no formal photograph released, no official palace statement afterward, no record of it in the court circular. To the institution, it never happened. And yet, Harry and Meghan held on to that moment as a sign that maybe, just maybe, the tide was turning. That maybe, in the Queen's final chapter, she would grant her blessing to their children's rightful titles. That maybe, when Charles eventually took the throne, he would honor that quiet approval. But that's not what happened. Fast forward just a few months later, September 8, 2022. Queen Elizabeth II passes away peacefully at Balmoral Castle. The nation mourns. Charles ascends as king. And from that very moment, Archie and Lilibet become, by law, prince and princess. Or at least, that's how it should have gone. But instead of swift confirmation, what followed was silence. Weeks of silence. No royal website update. No statement. Just quiet tension. And then, the internal debates began. According to palace insiders, Charles was immediately confronted with a dilemma. Acknowledge Archie and Lilibet's titles, honoring precedent and his mother's likely wishes. Or delay, freeze, or sideline the matter altogether, reinforcing his streamlined monarchy, vision, and appeasing more conservative senior royals and advisors. And here's the shocking part. The Queen allegedly left notes, memos, possibly even a letter, documents outlining her personal thoughts on succession, titles, and the inclusion of the Sussex children. One such document, according to a source from Windsor's Royal Archives, is labeled Private Guidance, the Sussex Line. It is believed to contain informal wishes from the Queen on how she hoped her great-grandchildren would be treated after her death. Not binding, but morally powerful. And that's the catch. Morally powerful, but politically inconvenient. Because those guidances don't fit Charles's strategy. They complicate his leaner, quieter, controlled monarchy narrative. They shine a light on a part of the family he wants to keep in the dark. So what happened to that letter? That's the million-pound question. Some insiders say it's locked in a sealed compartment at Windsor, only accessible by the reigning monarch and the Lord Chamberlain. Others believe it was handed to Charles and set aside, meaning buried, quietly ignored. The palace has refused to comment. But here's what we do know. 3 weeks after Elizabeth's death, Prince Harry reportedly confronted his father during a private meeting, believed to be at Clarence's house. Harry allegedly asked one simple question: "Are you going to honor her wishes?" Charles's response: "Harry, the crown adapts. Cold, strategic, final." And from that moment on, the path was set. So was the Queen's blessing broken? Or was it misunderstood? Some defenders of Charles say he's simply carrying out his mother's long-term vision for the monarchy, that she too favored streamlining, that she knew the Sussex children would grow up in America, detached from royal life, and therefore didn't expect full inclusion, that the private meeting with Lilibet was a grandmother's affection, not a monarch's approval. Maybe that's true, maybe not. But here's what can't be denied. The Queen's silence is being interpreted. Her memory is being weaponized. And her final legacy is being rewritten without her voice. The tragedy? We'll never know what Elizabeth II truly wanted. Not unless the letter is released. Not unless someone breaks ranks. And that might be about to happen. Because sources suggest Meghan Markle is considering a deeply personal move. Not through lawyers. Not through Netflix. But through a memoir. Yes, a long-rumored follow-up to Finding Freedom. This time, authored or co-authored by Meghan herself. And one chapter is allegedly titled The Last Visit, a first-hand account of the Queen's final meeting with her namesake. A retelling that, if true, could blow open the narrative. Because if Meghan puts in writing that Elizabeth gave her blessing, if she details the Queen's emotional warmth, if she documents that moment as a turning point, it would become a new moral record. And the monarchy would have to answer for why it ignored it. Why it froze the titles anyway. Why it erased the Queen's namesake from the royal future. Here's the deeper emotional twist. For decades, Elizabeth II was considered the unifying matriarch, the glue, the moral compass of the royal family. And now, her legacy has become a battleground. Her name is being used to defend both sides. Meghan and Harry claim emotional legitimacy through the Queen's affection. Charles and William claim institutional legitimacy through her long-term vision. So which is true? Both? Neither? That's the tragedy of memory. It can't speak for itself. Only those left behind can speak for it. And right now, those voices are divided. Sharp, strategic, and increasingly public. And here's where we leave this chapter, with a question that cuts deeper than protocol. If the monarchy cannot honor the memory of its matriarch, how can it expect the public to honor the monarchy? Because this isn't just about a title. It's about a little girl named Lilibet, and the grandmother she'll never truly know, and one sealed letter that could change everything. But what comes next would flip the entire narrative, and it's not coming from Windsor. It's coming from Hollywood. What if the real threat to the monarchy didn't come from Parliament, politics, or the press, but from a streaming platform? What if the fate of 2 royal children, born into legacy, wrapped in history, was derailed by a content deal, a trailer drop, and a multi-million-dollar contract with Netflix? Sounds dramatic, right? But in the royal world, image is currency. And in the House of Windsor, currency is control. So when Meghan and Harry signed on the dotted line with the world's biggest streaming giant, they weren't just producing content. They were producing chaos. Because behind the glitzy promos, the docuseries buzz, and the red carpet appearances was a deep, unspoken truth. The monarchy doesn't fear rebellion. It fears narrative loss. And Netflix gave the Sussexes a narrative weapon. This is the story of how Hollywood sealed the fate of Archie and Lilibet, how entertainment became exile. Let's rewind to 2020. Fresh off Megxit, Harry and Meghan announce a landmark deal with Netflix reportedly worth between $100 million and $150 million. It included documentaries, scripted series, children's programming, and feature films. At the time, it sounded innocent. Creative freedom, storytelling, philanthropic documentaries. But inside Buckingham Palace, the mood was very different. According to one former royal communications officer, Netflix isn't just a company, it's a global lens. And Harry and Meghan just handed them the family silver and said, "Film whatever you like." That terrified the palace. Why? Because Netflix doesn't do subtle. It doesn't do soft power. It does narrative spectacle. And suddenly, the royals couldn't control the angle anymore. Fast forward to December 2022. Netflix releases the first 3 episodes of Harry and Meghan, a docuseries offering the couple's side of the royal story. The trailer alone is a nuclear bomb. Slow-motion shots, paparazzi chaos, tears, allegations, claims of racism within the institution, visuals of Meghan crying juxtaposed with stoic palace guards, and then Harry looking dead into the camera. No one sees what's happening behind closed doors. For the Sussexes, it was catharsis. For the monarchy, it was mutiny with cinematic flair. Behind closed doors, the mood turned icy. Charles reportedly watched the series alone, refusing to discuss it even with Camilla. William allegedly called it a betrayal disguised as therapy. And most critically, a conversation was held among senior royal advisors that changed everything for Archie and Lilibet. According to insider leaks, one line from a private meeting held at Sandringham in early 2023 stands out. If they're selling the crown, their children cannot wear it. That line, attributed to a senior royal household figure, shaped the tone of every policy conversation that followed. It became the unofficial mantra of the Freeze Doctrine. You see, it wasn't just about what Harry and Meghan said. It was about what they chose to monetize. Family drama? Monetized. Royal rituals? Monetized. Internal conflicts? Monetized. The Queen's memory? Framed and edited into a Netflix finale. And even though Archie and Lilibet were barely featured in the series, their existence was a narrative tool, a symbol of royal modernity, of rejection, of what could have been. In the eyes of the palace, that was weaponization. But the final straw? It wasn't Harry and Meghan. It wasn't even Live to Lead, the Mandela-inspired documentary. It was something far more subtle. Meghan's cooking show, With Love, Meghan, announced in 2025 as a Netflix lifestyle series blending cooking, cultural storytelling, and wellness branding. On the surface, it's harmless. Soft piano music, sunlit kitchens, beautiful tables capes. But in the teaser, a single shot sparked fury at the palace. Meghan standing in front of a framed black and white photo of Queen Elizabeth II with toddler Lilibet on her lap. The image wasn't previously released. It was, reportedly, taken during the Platinum Jubilee private meeting. And the fact that it was being used in a commercial Netflix trailer? That crossed the line. Multiple sources confirmed that the palace had never authorized the release of that photo. It wasn't on the royal record. It wasn't circulated to press. And now, it was being used to subtly imply the Queen's blessing on Meghan's brand. Royal memory, monetized. That moment, according to one insider, was when Charles gave the quiet green light for the royal title freeze to proceed without hesitation. The logic? If they are willing to sell private family moments for profit, they cannot be trusted with royal legitimacy. Let's pause, because this is where things get morally messy. Should children be punished for their parents' media choices? Should Charles have separated the Sussexes' commercial activity from Archie and Lilibet's entitlement? Or was the risk just too great? Insiders say the king's biggest fear wasn't backlash. It was precedent, that if Archie and Lilibet retained full royal rights while their parents lived as celebrity entrepreneurs in California, the monarchy would lose its ability to define who is in and who is out. It would lose control of the brand. And in monarchy, brand control is everything. So Charles drew a line. Silently, privately, legally. He froze the titles. He sealed the gates. And no matter how many Netflix trailers drop, the institution will not budge. But let's look at the impact. Because the public didn't take long to connect the dots. Social media erupted. Hashtag Netflix versus monarchy. Hashtag Princess in exile. Hashtag Lilibet deserves more. And in the US, sympathy spiked. Talk shows criticized Charles. Celebrities rallied around Meghan. Even members of Congress chimed in, framing the issue as one of racial and transatlantic exclusion. But the palace? Silent. Not a word. Not even a denial. Just the memo. Just the freeze. Just that phrase lingering in the air. They're monetizing the crown. Here's a twist you may not expect. Some insiders believe this was exactly what Charles wanted. Not outrage. Not sympathy. Not even clarity. Just control. By freezing the titles instead of revoking them, he avoided being seen as the villain. Instead, He became the manager, the guardian of tradition, letting Meghan's Hollywood content do the dirty work for him, letting Netflix frame the Sussexes not as royals, but as celebrities, letting the audience draw their own conclusions, without ever issuing a press release. It's Machiavellian. It's effective. It's monarchy. But don't assume Meghan is backing down. Far from it. Sources say she's preparing to lean even harder into her personal brand, expanding as ever into lifestyle products, licensing children's storybooks under the name Princess Lilibet, a move that may trigger legal scrutiny in the UK. And yes, she's allegedly filming a second Netflix series, this time focused on motherhood, heritage, and legacy. Guess who's at the center of it? Lilibet and Archie, which means the war isn't over. It's evolving, from palace corridors to streaming libraries, from royal decrees to public perception, from Buckingham to Netflix. And the next battlefront? It may not be content. It may be court, because whispers suggest that Meghan has consulted legal experts about whether freezing royal titles, without formal revocation or due process, violates human rights frameworks in relation to identity and heritage. Could a lawsuit be coming? Could the crown be forced to answer in court? Is the monarchy ready for that level of scrutiny? Or will they gamble on silence again? And as the Sussexes prepare their next move, as Netflix editors tighten the next teaser, as Charles rehearses his next Christmas speech, one question looms over all of it. Can the monarchy survive being streamed, clipped, memed, and monetized? Because the crown once ruled by tradition, but now it's playing defense against algorithmic narrative. And in that game, the next chapter writes itself. Because Hollywood has a camera, and Lilibet Diana has a story, and what came next would take the battle beyond titles and into bloodlines. What if you were born into one of the most famous bloodlines on Earth, only to be told you'll never wear the crown, never serve the realm, and never even be acknowledged by the family whose name you carry? What if your destiny was written in royal ink, only for that ink to be quietly scrubbed from the page? This isn't just a hypothetical. It's the heartbreaking reality of Archie Harrison Mountbatten-Windsor, the first son of Prince Harry, the first biracial child born into the British royal family in modern times, a boy who was, by birthright, entitled to a princely legacy, and yet is now growing up in a reality where that legacy has been iced over, shadowed, and nearly erased. Not with malice, not with drama, but with institutional indifference. So the question we ask today is brutal, but necessary. Was Archie ever meant to be royal? Or was he destined to be forgotten from the start? Let's dive deep. Archie Harrison was born on May 6, 2019, at the private Portland Hospital in London. From the moment he arrived, the world watched. Eyes weren't just on Meghan's recovery or Harry's joy. They were fixed on what this child symbolized. Change, progress, possibility. He was the crown's first biracial descendant, a living, breathing embodiment of how the monarchy could evolve in the 21st century. Commentators hailed him as a bridge between the old firm and the new generation. Meghan and Harry, protective as ever, refused to immediately assign him a royal title, choosing instead to style him Master Archie Harrison for privacy. But even then, the entitlement lingered beneath the surface. He was still the grandson of the future king, still a direct male line descendant, still, in legal theory, a prince in waiting. And yet, something fell off from the start. Because despite the fanfare, something critical was missing: the crown's embrace. Let's look at the early clues. When Archie was christened in July 2019, the ceremony was held privately. Very privately. No press. No public announcement of godparents. No balcony appearance. That had never been done before for a royal baby of his status. And while Harry and Meghan insisted it was for privacy, insiders claim it was also a reaction to the tone behind palace walls. Because according to one former royal household staffer, there was always a tension around Archie. Not because of him, but because of what he represented. The monarchy didn't quite know what to do with a royal child who wasn't going to be raised in the mold they understood. That mold: British, institutionally loyal, and geographically anchored to the crown. But Archie wasn't that. He was different, and the monarchy's response to difference has never been warm. Let's talk about the move. In January 2020, Meghan and Harry announced they were stepping back from royal duties. By March, they had relocated to Canada, then California. Archie, not yet even a year old, was now growing up thousands of miles from Windsor Castle. No palace staff, no British upbringing, no little prince treatment, just a quiet Montecito life. Beaches, security guards, private schooling, a childhood outside the institution. But here's the twist. That childhood, though free, came at a cost. Because while Archie gained freedom from the spotlight, he also lost proximity to power. And in monarchy, out of sight eventually means out of title. But don't assume his identity was abandoned. Harry and Meghan made sure the world never forgot who Archie was born to be. They included him in video calls, in interviews, in birthday messages, in Prince Harry's memoir Spare, always framed lovingly, always contextualized as our son, our joy, our first light. Yet, the British media and royal watchers often reduced him to a sidebar, a token, a reminder of the Sussex rift, as if his presence was a footnote rather than a headline. And that's the real tragedy here. Because Archie isn't just a royal kid raised in America. He's the first child of the crown to be exiled before he could ever choose his path. Now let's get to the constitutional firestorm. As of now, Archie remains sixth in line to the British throne. Let's repeat that. Despite living in California, despite holding dual American-British citizenship, despite never attending a royal event since 2020, he's still legally next in line after Prince Harry. That means if, God forbid, something happened to Charles, William, George, Charlotte, and Louis, Archie could become king. That's not fiction. That's legal reality. And it terrifies the palace. Because he's being raised in a world without royal conditioning, without British establishment education, without loyalty to the institution. So if the worst-case scenario happened, the monarchy would have a sovereign who has never lived under its roof, never followed its rules, never been welcomed by its gatekeepers. That possibility, as remote as it may be, is the true reason behind the title freeze. Because while the monarchy can't legally delete Archie from the succession, it can make sure he's never functionally relevant, never given the tools to wield the crown, even if destiny demanded it. Let's go deeper. You might ask, why not let him have the title and just move on? Because titles in the royal world aren't just symbolic. They're structural. A prince is entitled to security, formal communications, ceremonial roles, and, critically, representation on the Council of State when of age. Charles didn't want that. William didn't want that. The courtiers certainly didn't want that. They wanted Archie to remain technically royal, but practically irrelevant. And so, the freeze was applied. And behind that freeze? Silence. No announcement. No outrage. Just the quiet deletion of a future before it ever truly existed. Let's reflect on identity.